I remember the way the air felt that morning. Heavy, like a storm was coming, even though the sky outside the courthouse was a mocking, bright blue. I sat in the back row, smoothing down my Sunday dress, feeling every bit of my size and my age. I was just a grandmother who'd spent 40 years cleaning floors to put my boy through school, and now I was watching his life hang by a thread. Judge Miller looked down at me from his high bench with eyes like cold marbles. He didn't see a grieving mother or a woman fighting for the truth. To him, I was just a loud, plus-sized nuisance in a cheap floral print. When I stood up to speak, to tell them that the evidence against my son was a lie, the judge didn't listen. He smirked. He made a comment about my theatrical proportions and told the bailiff to keep the rowdy woman quiet. The courtroom erupted in a cruel, low ripple of laughter. I felt the blood rush to my face. I wasn't just loud. I was desperate. I shouted that he was a man of pride, not a man of law. I mocked his authority because his authority was a sham. I told him his robe couldn't hide the rot in his heart. The room went deathly silent. Miller leaned forward, his face twisting into something ugly. He told me I had 30 seconds to sit down and accept his ruling. A ruling that would take my son away and seize my family home for reparations I didn't know. He started the clock. I could hear the ticking in my own skull. He thought he was watching me lose everything. He thought those 30 seconds were the end of my life. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I didn't sit down. Instead, I reached into my worn-out handbag and pulled out a small, cracked digital recorder. I didn't wait for permission. I pressed play. At first, it was just static, and Miller began to raise his gavel to end me. Then, a voice came through the speakers. Clear, arrogant, and unmistakable. It was Miller's voice, recorded in the hallway an hour before the trial, laughing with the prosecutor about how they'd already split the kickback from the land developers waiting for my house to be cleared. The gavel stayed frozen in mid-air. The court reporter stopped typing. The laughter in the room died a sudden, choking death. I watched the color drain from Miller's face until he looked like a ghost of the man who had just been mocking me. The security guards didn't move toward me. They moved toward the bench. In exactly 30 seconds, the world flipped on its axis. He had tried to strip me of my dignity, my home, and my son, thinking I was too small and too loud to matter. But as the sirens began to wail outside and the state troopers entered the room, I realized I hadn't lost a thing. And the judge who told me I was nothing, he didn't even look me in the eye when they let him out in the same handcuffs he'd intended for my son. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was heavy with the weight of a ruined man. Miller's gavel didn't fall with a bang this time. It slipped from his trembling fingers and hit the wood with a hollow thud. He tried to stand, to maintain some shred of that judicial pride, but his knees buckled. The very officers who had been ready to drag me out on his command were now the ones gripping his elbows, their faces grim. My son looked at me from the defense table, tears streaming down his face, realizing for the first time in months that he was actually going to go home. I didn't shout anymore. I didn't have to. I just stood there, a rowdy woman in a cheap dress, watching the high and mighty crumble into the dust of their own making. As they led him past my row, the golden light from the tall windows caught the sweat on his forehead. He looked small, not just defeated, shrunken. He had spent his whole career looking down on people like me, treating our lives like a game of chess where he owned all the pieces. But he forgot one thing. Even the smallest stone can take down a giant if it's thrown with the truth. I watched the heavy oak doors swing shut behind him, the clicking of his own handcuffs echoing like a final judgment.